In consulting, I really realized having less experience becomes an asset because you are the person that's not so stuck in the weeds. You can come in and say, wait, this doesn't actually make sense.
Today, I'm speaking with Matt Huang. Matt is the founder and CEO of Forge Media. Matt started in investment banking at Solomon Partners in New York City. After that, he exited into strategy at Google. But here's what makes Matt different. While doing all of that, he built an audience from scratch.
Nobody in my high school had parents who worked in high finance. In fact, we didn't even know that these jobs existed. I actually applied to Google 5 times before I got that role. Even someone that you may think has a very strong profile gets rejected a lot. That's the 80-20 of content creation, is understanding the audience and being able to speak to their pain points. Now, maybe this will come to bite me back in the future, but
Welcome to another episode of Wall Street Diaries. This is a podcast about extraordinary individuals who launched their careers on Wall Street and then used that experience as a springboard to build something incredible. I'm Max Adams, the head coach of Wall Street Mastermind, and today I'm speaking with Matt Huang. He's someone who took the classic Wall Street training ground, layered on elite corporate strategy reps at one of the most competitive companies in the world, and then used all of that to jump into entrepreneurship, where he's now running a highly successful business in media and content. But backing up a little bit, Matt started in investment banking at Solomon Partners in New York City, where he learned the craft the hard way. He worked those 100-hour weeks in Excel, and from there, he made a very non-traditional move, perhaps the only time I've ever seen this, where he decided to earn less money and also do less interesting work in consulting. You can tell I'm a little bit biased here, but we'll definitely have to dig into that one, Matt. But after that, he exited into strategy at Google and supported leaders across ads, shopping, Google Pay. So he got the investment banking, he got the consulting, he got the tech. But here's what makes Matt different. While doing all of that, he built an audience from scratch, organically through LinkedIn and YouTube. He racked up millions of views without ads, without cold outreach, without the usual gimmicks. And so he's distilled into a simple thesis, which is that in a noisy world, especially with AI, trust is the moat. So today, Matt is the founder and CEO of Forge Media. He helps B2B founders build a high trust brand on LinkedIn that creates inbound demand. He's also the co-founder of a podcast called Connection Accepted, where he's been running real-world outreach experiments to land guests far above their follower count. So, Matt, really grateful to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
thanks, Max. So excited.
Yeah, we got a lot to talk about there. But let's jump right in with chapter 1, which is way back to undergrad. You know, we're jumping back to the beginning. You were at Georgetown. And so when you were at Georgetown studying finance, did you think you would later decide to turn down investment banking, consulting, and high tech to become a LinkedIn content creator?
I love that you asked this question, Max, because absolutely not. I did not imagine a world where I would be doing any of the things that I'm doing today as we speak. And to set the stage a little bit and give folks some context, when I was a student at Georgetown, I was in the business school, I was studying finance, and I had this banking or bust mentality. And I was super gung-ho, like basically laser focused on getting into investment banking. I really didn't consider that many different career paths. There were folks that were going into consulting. Georgetown's a really pre-professional school, so obviously folks were applying to law school, applying to medical school, things like that. But I was very much single-mindedly focused on getting a job on Wall Street. So if you'd asked me back then, do you think there's a world where you're not working in finance, doing something completely unrelated with a social media following on YouTube and LinkedIn? And I would have laughed at you.
Yeah. Well, and frankly, I probably would have laughed at you too, and at myself as well. I think that content creation is very much verboten almost in finance too. Like, I don't know what your experience was, but I remember early on in my investment banking career, like my summer internship, I decided to write a post about my summer internship. Within probably 30 minutes, my staff was calling me, there, Max, you have to take that down immediately. And so realistically, it's just not something you're able to do. So we're going to get into that. I can't wait to talk a little bit about sort of that crazy juxtaposition here. But let's start out with that banking or bust mentality that you mentioned. So what was the original drive towards investment banking? Was it the prestige, the opportunity, the money?
Yeah, I'm going to give a really honest answer here, Max. So, growing up, my parents, they worked in the healthcare industry, and I went to, I would say, a fairly middle class public high school. So, nobody in my high school had parents who worked in high finance or consulting. In fact, we didn't even know that these jobs existed, and everyone was really focused on going into
Liver.
STEM. So, if you think
Yeah.
engineering, medicine, research, those kinds of things. And so, I had a fairly and so going into undergrad, I actually initially was thinking I'm going to go to medical school or I'm going to be pre-med and I might apply to medical school and sort of follow down the family footsteps. But in my first year, I signed up for a bunch of lab sciences, physics, chemistry, all that jazz, and very quickly realized, man, I as interesting as it is to understand how the world works from a very basic level, this is not something that
Mhm.
gets me out of bed in the morning. And it's really not something that I can see myself sticking around
Right.
in school for the next
Yeah.
8 to 10, however many years, right? Because you got 4 years
Mhm.
of medical school after that. And then, maybe 2 years of residency if you want to specialize, like even longer than that. So realistically, after my first semester, I went home for winter break, talked to my brother, who's a couple years older than me, and
Mhm.
at the time was really serving as a mentor. I told him, dude, I'm really not excited by the idea of having to do all of this work and stay in school for that long. And as fun as it is to learn about these different topics and new subjects, I really just want to get into
Mhm.
the professional world sooner. And
Mhm.
do you have any advice for me? And fortunately, my brother had actually learned about this job
Mhm.
called investment banking that happened to pay really well out of college. You could earn six figures your first year out, which obviously to me at the time, I was like, wow, that's crazy. And also you got to work on these really large multi-million billion-dollar deals with companies that are merging or acquiring another
Mhm.
business, maybe raising capital. And he essentially encouraged me to explore something outside of the sciences. So that was the seed
Mhm.
of it. And so what I did was I went back to school and then I tried to apply to a couple clubs, including a
Yep.
student run investment fund. And I think this is where it starts for a lot of folks. But actually, I got rejected the first time I
Wow.
applied to that investment fund because I had no idea what I was doing. And we had to pitch a stock. And I just had I didn't even know what a PE ratio was. So I obviously struggled. And I actually ended up having to apply a second time later on and ended up getting in and was super fortunate for that experience because it also opened up my eyes to being able to speak to seniors and juniors who are doing
Mhm.
internships on Wall Street. But essentially, that is where the pivot from pre-med to business or finance started. It was really a realization and a hard conversation with my brother around, oh, this isn't something that's that interesting. And then also sort of the realistic side of me thinking, okay, I want to position myself in the best possible way in my business career. And what are the paths that are going to
Yeah.
increase the likelihood that I will succeed
Yeah.
regardless of what I do
So it
down the
sounds
line.
like it was a little bit of all of that. It was like kind of the prestige. It was kind of the optionality. It was kind of the money. And what's cool about that though is that like you had someone in your life who did know about this, even though you came from like a middle class background and it wasn't like a familiar thing in your school and whatnot. And I have a hard time like understanding how that happens because I've been in this world so long. I'm like, well, doesn't everyone know about investment banking now? I've been thinking about this like nonstop for a decade, coaching students. Everyone that I talk to knows what investment banking is and like what they're excited about it. But I'm curious for your brother, like how did he even learn about investment banking? Like what was the connection there?
Yeah, so it's a really fascinating story there, Max, because my brother actually went to a
Mhm.
non-target school. And I, at Georgetown, I would consider to be a target school. Every year they send lots of kids into
Mhm.
Goldman, Morgan Stanley, elite boutiques. My brother, on the other hand, actually went to a very small liberal arts college in Massachusetts that very few people have ever heard of. It was a complete non-target. And for all intents and purposes, he probably should not have even learned that there was this world of investment banking if he had not met, if he had not attended this career workshop that was being run by a alumni of his school who had broken into Wall Street, worked at Morgan Stanley, actually pivoted over to McKinsey, and then was a vice president of a private equity firm. So this guy realized that if you are at a non-target school, half the battle is a lot of these students don't even realize that these roles exist. And then once they do realize these roles exist, they don't realize just how competitive it is. And they have this sense of complacency or just a lack of urgency because no one else around them feels that. Whereas if you go to a target school, and I have a unique perspective with having been at Georgetown, and my little sister as well going to a target school and seeing what the recruiting environment is like at those places compared to where my brother went to school, it's night and day. And I think a lot of students at non-targets just don't even realize that. So that's like a huge hurdle to overcome. And then obviously there's like, once you realize that, oh, I need to work really hard on this, it's still an uphill battle because you don't have the network or you don't even know what to do. And there's less resources on campus, all that jazz. The last thing I'll say is basically my brother found out about investment banking, even though he was at a non-target school, because he attended this career workshop that was run by that alumni. And only because of that did he understand that, hey, there's an opportunity. And if Matt, my little brother who attends a target school, really puts his mind to it, then he might actually have a good chance. Because the story with my brother is he really wanted to break in and unfortunately was not able to break into banking. Now, eventually, years down the line, he actually did end up working at a consulting firm and then breaking into private equity. So there is a happy ending to that story. But he struggled immensely. And I think he didn't want the same for me.
Yeah. Well, and that actually echoes exactly why I coach is like, I don't want other people to deal with the same difficulties that I feel like I faced sometimes while I was trying to get into investment banking. And I also really love that breakdown between sort of the target and the non-target mentalities, where a lot of the times, like, if you don't know about this world, you don't know how hard it is, and you do get complacent. But the other downside that we also don't talk about enough is how if you do go to those target schools, if you do go to the Georgetowns and like the Whartons of the world and the NYU Stern, like it is also its own really, really caustic pressure cooker in its own way, where I see a lot of students who are so opposite of complacent that they almost like fall apart. They're just like a bundle of nerves and they're like, I can't even like send a cold email. Like I'm paralyzed because this is so hard. It's so competitive and things like that. And so like there's a little bit of a balance where honestly, I feel very lucky. I went to BYU, which I would call sort of like semi-target, where still places probably 50 to 70 kids in banking each year, which is actually pretty substantial now that I think about it. And there's like a good camaraderie, a good environment and whatnot, but it's not like the acceptance rate to the club to get into the place where you can apply for the internships is like 2%, like some of these schools. And so honestly, like I think that it cuts both ways a little bit. And maybe somewhere in the middle is honestly the best place mentally to like be in your A game for these recruiting cycles. But this is something we can debate, certainly.
Yeah, I just on that point, Max, I completely agree with you. I think there is a trade-off because when you are at these really competitive target schools, it can feel like a bubble where there are so many other kids that are also gunning for the exact same thing. Everyone around you feels really hardworking and really smart, and a lot of them are. And you never feel like you're doing enough. And I certainly can speak to this if you want to go in this direction, but imposter syndrome was massive during this time for me. I always felt like I was not doing enough. And in retrospect, I was basically spending every waking hour thinking about investment banking recruiting. But even then, I felt like I wasn't doing enough. There was always one more email I could be sending. There was always one more banker, I could be trying to get on the phone. And there was always, a little bit more technical prep that I could be studying instead of doing something else on a Friday night. So yeah, it's a really tough environment. I don't think it's right to generalize and say that, just because you go to Harvard, like it's easy for you to break in, because no, those kids are also competing against all the other Harvard students. So it's a
different
different type
type,
of
and
competitiveness.
in some ways worse. Not necessarily just because like you're competing against other Harvard students, but because you're competing against like 250 students in the investment banking club at Stern or something like that, where it's like each school typically only gets somewhere from like, maybe 5 to 7 candidates at a big bank with like a, big group or something like that at a super target school, or like just a couple from a non-target school. And so the odds actually coming from some of these like massive target schools on a per capita basis can actually be lower because the banks like sort of cap it on the number of students that they take from an individual school. And so it's like, again, a double-edged sword a little bit. But I'm also very curious culturally at this time, where it sort of seems like if you're someone who's had a desire to like create and to build audiences and to like have content, how you squared that with the culture of finance. Because in these pressure cookers and like in these schools and stuff, like you're basically encouraged to never post anything anywhere. Like the less internet presence other than a very professional LinkedIn that you have, the better. And so did you have a desire to like build and create content back then? And if so, how did you balance that against like the requirements of recruiting?
I love that you asked this question, Max. No,
Okay.
I had zero desire to create content back then. And it may sound absolutely insane to you hearing me say this today, because now I run a business that's focused on helping other people use content to drive traffic to their businesses. And because I have a YouTube channel now with over 180,000 subscribers. But at the time, no way. I, one, did not see the value in creating content. And I think that's one thing that I also think the finance industry and a lot of these more conservative, old school industries like law, they still struggle to see the value in content, because I think the perceived risk is really high for them relative to the reward, even though I believe I'm biased, but I believe that content has an asymmetric risk reward profile. And so I didn't recognize the value. And then two, no one else around me was saying, hey, you should do content. In fact, they were saying, oh, you got to be careful about your digital footprint, because you don't want to post something weird and then you're a recruiter and you're interviewing at an investment bank and then someone looks you up and then they see something kind of controversial that could cost you the offer. So that's why I didn't even think about it, and I didn't want to create. That's not to say that I wasn't a creative person, though. I think that the creativity just manifested in different ways. So when I was in university, I played in the university orchestra. I've always been a pretty musical person. I've been playing the violin since I was 4. And it's funny because I play a lot less now that I'm a working professional. And it's almost like that desire to still be somewhat creative and self-express in a different way just manifested into content instead. But not to get totally off track, to answer your, to tie it all together, I didn't see the value in content back then. And so I didn't do it. And also the industry and people around me didn't seem to really encourage this kind of activity.
Yeah, well, and it really is something that even now as a coach, I'm like, hey, like take down your Facebook, like make everything private, make your Instagram private. I mean, don't have a like an online presence as much as possible, because realistically, like the banking world is very judgmental and it's very risk averse. And so anything that you have out there can be held against you, and probably will be held against you at some point if it's public enough. And so I understand the risk aversion in part, but just because like these are billion-dollar deals, like everything has to go right from a regulatory perspective, from a social media perspective, like PR perspective. But at the same time, like there are downside costs to that, especially for those who are interested in building a presence and whatnot. And so I want to put a pin in this. I want to return to this conversation on like what is the value of creating a following and what is that asymmetric risk and reward that you're talking about. But we're not at that chapter in your career for now. First, we got to talk about investment banking. Then I got to hear a little bit more about consulting, and then your career in tech. And so the last question I'll ask about your time at Georgetown is, what did you learn in undergrad that prepared you for a career in investment banking, a career in consulting, and a career in big tech?
This is a really good question. I think that the number one thing was, at that stage of my life, I was learning the fundamental work ethic that is required to not only land these types of jobs, but to perform well in them, and also the mindset that you have to have in order to break in. You know, I had a lot of imposter syndrome, as I mentioned, as a student, but it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg problem, because when you don't have anything that proves or shows to yourself that you can achieve a certain outcome, how do you find the self-belief to still try and pick yourself up after you fail? It sounds a little bit cheesy, but think about it. At some point, every successful person started with none of the accolades and achievements that you see now on their LinkedIn profile. And they still had to have some inkling of maybe a chip on their shoulder or self-belief to be able to take that step forward and still try to achieve that first thing. And then once you achieve the first accomplishment, I do believe that it gets a little bit easier, because it compounds and your own self-confidence increases, and you just start wanting to aim bigger and bigger, because you realize like, oh, I can actually achieve this, or I can, get this job at Lazard. In your case, I'm sure probably like compelled you to also just shoot even higher after that. But I think the biggest thing I learned from my time at Georgetown was how to work hard, and the mindset of just being able to push through a long period of time where you don't see any tangible
and
results.
that delayed gratification is really freaking hard in investment banking, especially because you start prepping for it in your freshman year, you recruit for it in your sophomore year, you finally do an internship in your junior year, and then you don't actually get the job, get the paycheck, get the prestige, get the actual interest of doing investment banking until 4 years later, once you're actually graduated. And so I remember it was kind of funny, like when I recruited initially, and I sort of woke up right before my junior internship, and I was like, wait, did I just dream that? Do I actually have a banking job that I'm about to go do? Because it's been so freaking long since when I actually prepared for it. So anyways, let's jump forward to that chapter here. So we've talked about your background a little bit, and the concepts of content while recruiting, the pressure cooker, the imposter syndrome, which I think so many people feel at these target schools. And then eventually you got there. You made it to investment banking. Let's move to that chapter where you ended up at Solomon Partners. And so how did you end up in the career of your dreams? What was it like? How did you get there?
I think we should take a quick step back and talk about my junior year summer internship. So I actually did not intern at Solomon Partners. And as many students who are recruiting know, in banking, the junior year internship, the penultimate internship between your junior and senior year, that's pretty important, because oftentimes you get the return offer and you're pretty much set at that point. If you get the return offer senior year, you're just coasting. You can go back to campus, tell everyone that you got this big high finance job, and just relax. My junior year internship was a very different experience than most people will have, and that is because of COVID. So I had a fully remote junior year summer internship in banking in the summer of 2020. And at the time, I had an offer lined up at a restructuring, distressed M&A boutique investment bank. It was a really, really cool area of finance to work in, very technical, and I actually really enjoyed studying up on the this is going to sound crazy, but the bankruptcy code and how financial restructuring even works. And it's wow, you're restructuring a company's liabilities so that it doesn't have to die and it can keep operating. And was super excited to work in New York for the first time. And then, spring 2020, you get, you see the news headlines. Okay, COVID-19. And to everyone's dismay, everyone's going virtual. A lot of banks are either canceling their internships, or they're doing completely remote internships, or they're doing remote but abbreviated internships that are just a month long instead of the typical, 8 to 12 weeks. And nobody's doing it in person. So I'm already really bummed out. I'm like, dang it. I worked so hard for this internship, and now I've got to do it. I've got to do remote. And fortunately for me, because the bank that I worked at was focused on distressed M&A, there were a lot of companies that were actually going into distress, especially on the retail side. If you think about like a lot of retailers and malls where foot traffic just went straight to zero, those companies were suffering. So there was actually a lot of activity that was picking up. And as a result of that, it was fortunate because the bank still wanted its interns to work for the full
Yeah.
8 to 12 week internship, even though we were remote. So while a lot of my peers were actually getting stuck doing 1 month kind of fake internships where they just got given a random project to do, I actually got to work on a couple live restructurings. And even though it was remote, which made it very difficult to learn, being able to just even listen in on a lot of these calls was extremely eye-opening for me. And I think it was also a little bit of a shock, what the world of distressed M&A is like. It's a very sharp-elbowed place. When you're working with a business that is going under or about to go under, naturally nobody is really that happy. So the stark contrast is, if you think about venture capital and startups, everyone's super optimistic. Everyone's like, thinking really big and like, oh, we're going to be the next unicorn company, and VCs want you to dream big as a founder. It's a very happy environment, I would say, relative to the distress world, which is like, guys, if we don't do anything, we're going under. Like, this company is no longer going to exist, or something, we're gonna have to like sell off all our assets at a huge discount. The CEO, the management team is extremely stressed. The investors are also not really happy in most cases, and they just want their money back. So it's a very sharp-elbowed place. You work with a lot of lawyers. And I think culturally there was a little bit of a mismatch between the type of person that I am and the kinds of people that I get along with. And that's not to say like I didn't have a good experience. I think that the people that I worked with were extremely, extremely sharp. And for anyone who is interested in that world, I highly recommend it, because you get a lot of valuable learning that, regardless of whether or not you want to pivot into a distressed M&A, a distressed turnaround private equity shop or credit hedge fund, it's a incredible learning experience. But to fast forward, after that summer, I had gotten the return offer, but I was really thinking hard, do I want to do this full time? Do I want to dedicate the next, foreseeable, 2 to 3 years of my career after I graduate to this? And again, a hard conversation with my brother. He's like, dude, you don't look that excited about your return offer. What's wrong? And I told him, look, I learned a lot this summer, but I just feel like culturally there was a little bit of a mismatch. I'm not sure if distressed is the world that I want to stick with, and I still want to try working with healthy companies and seeing what companies that are looking to grow and expand via M&A are experiencing. And so he pushed me again. He said, hey, okay, well, you always have the option of trying to recruit full time. You have this valuable internship experience under your belt. It actually might be easier for you to land a full-time offer at a different bank, because you've proven that you can get into banking, which is already a huge barrier. So the crazy story here, which I'll give you the short answer, is that I emailed a bunch of my old connections, got a couple interviews at different firms, but Solomon, I had no connections at. And I actually cold emailed their head of consumer and retail investment banking, a guy named David Schiffman, who's actually now their head of M&A. I didn't know this guy at all. The only reason why I emailed him was because he previously worked at the bank that I had interned at. That was the only connection. And I emailed him my resume. I basically explained, hey, like, my name's Matt. I recently interned at XYZ firm, blah, blah, blah. But that said, like, really interested in Solomon. Basically asked him for a chat, and he completely ghosted me. It did not respond, no acknowledgement. I didn't even know if the email hit his inbox. And so I thought that was that. But then a couple weeks later, I get an email from their head of HR, head of recruiting, who says, hey, so and so forwarded your resume to us. We actually are actively hiring and expanding our analyst class for next year. Are you still looking for a new role? So, long story short, went through the interview process, got the offer. That's how I ended up at Solomon, through a cold email with someone that I had never even talked to before.
Wow. That is a crazy story, and sounds like it was just an incredible time to be in banking during the middle of COVID, trying to do the internship, like getting your hopes up for this, and then just entirely having to like shatter that to some extent, and then rebuild. And so first off, like heart goes out to 2020 version of Matt that had to deal with that, because like the emotional whiplash was insane. Like I remember doing that already as an analyst. Like it sucked. It was really hard. But I can only imagine if you were like a couple years earlier than that, and like stressed about the return offers and stressed about like trying to like get that figured out, like it just adds to the intensity of it. And so knock on wood that nobody that we're coaching right now at Wall Street Mastermind has to go through something similar to that. But I'm curious to see, like, once you got into the seat, like, it sounds like you had periods where you're more and less excited about the job of banking and things like that. And so, relative to the public glitz and glamour of investment banking, like, what it actually looked like in the seat as an analyst?
Yeah, I'm not going to sugarcoat it today, Max, especially because I no longer work in banking. The banking analyst role is a very difficult job for many people, especially when it's your first job out of college. In many cases, you've never worked a job like this before, and you've never worked a job that is as demanding as this. And so I think a lot of people understand that you have to work a lot of hours, and everyone knows, oh yeah, bankers work a lot. But when you actually have to live it, and when you actually have to do the work and put in the hours, and you're actually staying late in the office and potentially missing out on certain events and working on the weekends, like that is a very different experience than just being in college on campus thinking about, oh yeah, I could totally work 80 hours a week. Oh yeah, like I stay up late in the library studying for my exams. I could totally work 80 hours a week in banking. I think I definitely had that mentality, and actually getting to New York, working in person at Solomon this time, fortunately, was a very eye-opening experience, because for the first time I was experiencing the rigor of a investment banking analyst program at a bank in New York with a lot of deal flow. And let me tell you, when you work at a bank with a lot of deal flow and a lot of activity, that's a very positive thing from a learning perspective. But what it means is everyone is really, really busy. And so I think that the banking analyst role is really challenging for folks, not just because of the sheer hours, but it's the inability to sometimes have the level of control over your schedule that you were used to when you were a student. In college, you have a lot of control over your schedule. You pick which classes you want to take. You structure your schedule so that you only take classes at a certain time. And, maybe you don't like taking early morning classes, so you push them all to the afternoon. Or maybe if you were like me, you would stack all your classes to like the first half of the week, and then you'd have like Thursday or Friday off. So that is a non-existent thing in banking. In banking, you are basically supposed to be available, or at least responsive, pretty much around the clock. I remember having a conversation with someone who was a banker before I started my role at Solomon. And I asked him, hey, like, is there anything that I should keep in mind? Do you have any advice for me as I enter this new role? And the only thing he told me was just be ready to be available 18/7, which means 18 hours of the day, you should be responding to emails or messages or pings. And then, the remaining 6, you're probably asleep. But like 18/7, that's like his mentality. And I think that is not an exaggeration. Some people might be listening to this thinking, wow, that's inhumane. What do you mean? But genuinely, I think that's the level of rigor that investment banks bring to the table, and that they, as advisors to their clients, want to deliver the best, highest quality service. And sometimes what that means is we are extremely responsive, extremely fast. We will produce a very high quality deliverable in a very short amount of time. And how do you do that? Well, that means your team needs to also be extremely fast, extremely responsive, and able to still produce really high quality work.
Yeah, no, like totally. Like you're speaking this extraordinarily clearly. In fact, I don't think I've ever heard this mentality described as well as you just described it, where I think sometimes it's 18/7, sometimes it's 27, and sometimes it's 15/7 or something like that. I think it flexes depending on like what sort of deals you're on. But there are definitely weeks where like, and this is crazy to me to imagine 5 years later or 10 years later or whatever, but like I would literally keep my email ding loud enough that it would wake me up in the middle of the night whenever it dinged. And so I'd get woken up, 10 times a night or something by like an email ding right next to my bed on like my pillow. So I could just like check, okay, the VP got my comments. Okay, I can go back to sleep for a second until I get like something else. And so like it really is just the autonomy of it and the lack of control that's so much harder about it than the number of hours necessarily, because as you grow to like an associate level in private equity or a VP level or something like that, you typically are able to plan out your schedule. You're able to like find times, and you're able to like get a little bit of control and like a little bit of like self-determination in terms of what you're doing. And that just makes it so much easier, so much better for what you're trying to do. And it makes the hours feel a lot easier than they do when someone else is telling you exactly what to do, when to do them. So curious, as you went through this process, like how much of your success in banking came from like the soft skills that you developed in college versus the hard skills that you developed? Because fundamentally, like I have to imagine you were quite good at it, even though it was so grueling. And so how much of that came from the hard skills versus the soft skills?
That's a really good question, Max. I think my soft skills were not as good as they are today when I was in banking. And I know we're going to talk about consulting in a second, but when I was in banking, yeah, of course I had a solid level of soft skills because I was able to get the job, and I was able to interview and do the networking. But I think for me, a lot of the success, or at least my strengths in banking, came from the hard skills side of things, and just execution, being good at being super reliable. So like if something needed to be done, I was the guy that would be like, will do in 5 minutes. And then like, you can depend on me to get it done. But if you're going to ask me to try and go talk to a client or try and influence a managing director's opinion about something, good luck. I had no idea how to do that. And I was also very scared to talk back to superiors. And I think banking culture also can be a little bit more hierarchical, which, later on as I moved into consulting and then into tech, I was like, wow, these industries are so different from high finance. But at the time, that was my first job. So that was all I knew. And it was very much a managing director says this, okay, guys, like we're going to do it. And I think that can be very positive because I basically got really good at executing. And so to answer your question, the hard skills were where my strengths were, and the soft skills were still in kind of the developmental stage, if I'm being quite honest.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's common for investment banking analysts in particular, because you over-index to some extent in the recruiting process on like technicals. You're just like, hey, I've got to like learn Excel. I'm going to learn all my keyboard shortcuts. I'm going to learn all my PowerPoint shortcuts. I'm going to like get good at the DCF and the Wall Street Mastermind technical cheat sheet questions or whatever the case may be. And nobody really practices like, how do you write a will do email that like actually responds to your VP? Or like, how do you communicate with a client on a call when they're like kind of annoyed that you made a mistake or something like that? And so fundamentally, I think that makes sense. But what's ironic about that and kind of bad about like the way that the analyst programs are structured is it really is not what's going to make you succeed in the long run. Like building a DCF, yeah, sure, you've got to be able to do that flawlessly. Like I'm not downplaying it. But at some point, like your ability to build a DCF will caps out. Whereas your soft skills like continue to grow and continue to be important in a business where fundamentally you're trying to talk to people, you're trying to get them to give you business and do deals with them. And that actually brings me into my next question, which is I want to understand what you're thinking about the future of AI with investment banking. Because, and I'll give you my perspective just briefly here, is that like I think that a lot of the hard skills are going to become commoditized and replicated in a world where general AI is able to like build a DCF just about as well as your average investment banking analyst. And so what do you think that the future of investment banking looks like in the face of AI, and how's that going to impact the balance between the hard skills and the soft skills in your opinion?
I think about this question a fair amount, and I think it's relevant to any professional services industry, whether it be banking, consulting, or anything else. What we're already seeing is, yes, these tools are able to build a financial model in a very fast amount of time. And I think a lot of the traditional value of a banking analyst or a consulting junior level employee, a lot of the original value used to be the execution. But this AI is making it easier for us to do the execution. It's able to do it faster. It's oftentimes going to be more accurate. That's not to say it doesn't make mistakes, but it can do things pretty much faster than a banking analyst can. So maybe in the past, if it took a banking analyst, if you want to say like a day to put together a financial model, maybe a AI tool can spit out maybe like something that's 75, 80% of the way there in a matter of minutes, maybe even less. Yeah. Which is insane if you think about that mismatch. So I think that a few things may happen. Banking, investment banks and consulting firms may downsize the analyst classes. I know this is not going to make people super happy, but the other thing, though, is that I don't think that the banking analyst role is going to be eliminated completely. I think that's just not the case. It's just the scope of the responsibilities may change, and the type of work that you're doing may change slightly. The tools and workflows that you use are going to change. So if you think about like high finance before Excel, there was a world where people did not use Excel in high finance, and they still made deals work. So I know for you and me, Max, we don't even know what that world was like, but maybe we're at an inflection point where in the next 5 years, Excel, not saying this is going to happen, but like maybe we're shifting away from a tool like Excel to something else in the future.
Or just AI Excel on steroids sort of thing is probably a loud bet on.
Exactly. So I don't think it's going to take away the job. I think it's just going to change how analysts work. They're going to be using these tools. Maybe they'll be using like an army of AI agents to go help them do research and update models and things like that. But the junior level employee's role is still going to be there.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I hope that it's not downsizing even. In fact, I think there's a case to be made for approximate flat. And I'll make my case for that just briefly. Like, first off, I think that with AI in general, like my guess is that this is going to increase the volume of deal flow. Like, I think that there's going to be like a lot of AI driven deals like in the tech ecosystem, but B, also just like a general ability for companies that have access to the most AI sophistication to have real synergies from acquiring smaller companies. And so my guess is that that drives M&A. And so I think that if there is an increase in M&A volume, and that's facilitated by greater efficiency, then hopefully there's a case where we don't actually downsize the number of analysts. I wouldn't be surprised if there's like a little bit of moderate downsizing, but I agree that it's never going to go away completely, because at the end of the day, this is like a relationships business. Like, you're not going to let an AI, at least in the foreseeable future, do a $10 billion deal without any human oversight. And so you're going to need people there to like look you in the eye and say, yes, this is a fair value for this company to pay. And therefore, like, if you need that person at the top, you need the people all the way down so you can like train that human capital a little bit. And if that does happen, if there is a downsizing, that actually just makes the banking job more competitive and more enticing in some ways, because I bet that analyst, instead of getting paid, 150 to 250K, is probably going to get paid 200 to 300 or possibly even more, because they're going to be single-handedly managing a bunch of different deals, and they're going to be like the smartest person coming out of these schools. Like you're just going to get nothing but the best working on these deals and training the AI as effectively as possible. So I'm actually pretty curious to see what it looks like. And, I think that the future of investment banking analyst careers is not that dark, at least.
Completely agree with you there. I definitely think there is a tendency for
Mhm.
fear mongering, and you'll see the headlines, and those are kind of designed to attract attention, so they can be a
Yeah.
little bit sensationalist. But I also think that, like you said, these roles are not going to disappear. They're just going to change. I actually like the point about increased deal flow. I hadn't thought about that, and I think it's a
Mhm.
very valid point as well. So all that's to say, I think there's a very positive future for investment banks in the age of AI, and it's just going to look a little bit different than maybe what
Yeah.
people think it might
Yeah,
look
for
like.
sure. Well, so we almost are at the time where we got to move forward and talk about consulting and tech. But any last crazy stories from your time at Solomon? I know investment banking can be a wild world. So any last crazy stories before we jump into talking about consulting?
I think the stories that I have are all centered on one theme, which is banking taught me that being an advisor that your clients can trust, oftentimes there's a lot of parts that play into it, but one of the fundamental pieces of it is being willing to do whatever it takes. So this might feel like a stupid example, but to demonstrate, I think it does a great job of demonstrating just the extent to which investment banks care and how much they will do to
Mhm.
help out a client, or to present the client in a good light, or themselves in the best possible footing. There was a CEO that was coming into a client
Mhm.
meeting at our office, and we had breakfast catered because it was a morning meeting, early in the morning, probably like 8:30 or 9 a.m. They were going to come into the office. We had a whole conference room prepared. I made sure that like the books were
Mhm.
printed and bound and sitting on the table neatly. And at around, I want to say 8 in the morning, I'm heading into the office, and my associate calls me, and he's like, "Hey, can you check if there are any bran muffins on the table?" Because I got there before everyone else. And I was like, what? First of all, what does a bran muffin even look like? Is this just me? But I don't actually know what it should look like. So I'm like Googling on my phone, bran muffin. Oh, what is that? Oh, okay. And I did not see anything that looked like that. So I texted him. I said, yeah, I don't think we have any. Why? And he says, the CEO of this company specifically requested a bran muffin. Can you please, in the next 30 minutes before they show up, like please run outside and go to like a bodega somewhere down the street and find a
Mhm.
bran muffin and bring it back. So, and I've told this story to friends after the fact, and they've always reacted in a very funny way, because they're like, that's so silly. What? Like, it's just a muffin. Why did they make you do it? And because I was basically running around Manhattan trying to find a single brand muffin, and then bring it back to the office for this guy. And I just think that a lot of people laugh at
Mhm.
that story, and they think it's crazy, and they're like, "What the heck? Your boss has made you do that? Like that's not
Yeah.
even in your job scope. Like that's not in the job description." But I think the point that I take away from this story and from this experience is the best advisors, they don't see
Mhm.
anything as below them. They will do whatever it takes, even if it's something as small as, let me get a brand muffin because the
Mhm.
client asked for it. They It's that level of
Mhm.
nothing is below me that banking drilled into me, and I think that served me really well in my future
I
roles as
love
well.
that. And I'm just chuckling at that story because It's a story that every investment banking analyst probably has at some point in their couple of years, is like some version of that that's like straight out of like Wolf of Wall Street or like the Devil Wears Prada or something like that. Like it very much is a real thing. And granted, I do think that like it's gotten better probably since like the 80s and like, you know, classic like Wall Street, capital W, capital S, Gordon Gekko types. But it certainly still like vestiges of that culture still exist that are less egalitarian and less meritocratic and more particular, I guess, than probably we would see in 2026. But the other thing that I love about you, Matt, is that you flip that around. Instead of saying like, okay, yeah, isn't this crazy that there's like this entitled person who thinks that like people should just run around getting them muffins for no reason when there's other good like breakfast food available. You said, no, actually, this is the role of the advisor. Like this is what people do. And to some extent, like that's so true. Like in the services industry, like that is your goal, is to like provide whatever the hell that they're looking for, whether that's a brand muffin or now like an incredible LinkedIn outreach funnel or something like that. And so I think that mindset's going to take you far. And I love that you twisted that in a positive direction. But we've got to talk about consulting now, because then there are a lot of crazy stories from Solomon period, but then you did one of the craziest things I actually really haven't seen before, which is going from investment banking to consulting after your analyst career. So what in the world drove that?
Max, I've gotten asked this question so many times, and I think it's just also given me a lot of time to think about and reflect on that interesting career pivot, because what a lot of people don't know is that I actually was recruiting for a couple private equity roles around the same time. So this was, I want to say, about a year in, and I, at the time, was a little bit unsure, to be quite honest, about whether or not I wanted to stick in finance. And I had been going through the motions, though. You know, my banking analyst class, everyone was doing the PE interviews. On-cycle had kicked off earlier. And so I had been doing those interviews and knew that I was well positioned to land a role in middle market private equity. That was pretty much what like 80% of the analyst class historically would end up doing, and knew that it was a very solid career option. Like how can you go wrong, right, with working in private equity? And obviously I was going to make more money if I'd gone down that route as well. But I think this is where I think this is one of the earliest instances where you can see that I have this almost rebellious side of not wanting to always go with the flow, or not always wanting to take the exact like same approach as everyone else. And maybe this is my fatal flaw as well. We'll see. But I remember, again, having a hard conversation with my brother. See, there's a common theme here.
Got a good brother, it sounds like.
And I know he's I owe a lot of my career success to his guidance. But basically I told him, look, I've got this PE offer, and you know, it feels like a pretty good offer, but he also mentioned to me, hey, like consulting firms are hiring a lot right now. This was 2022, I think. Don't quote me on that, but basically this was peak hiring for consulting firms. It was crazy. Everyone was hiring. And so there's a little bit of serendipity with this and being a little bit opportunistic, because my brother was working in consulting at the time, and I had an inside look into the work that he did. And it was really interesting seeing what consultants actually do. I had a lot of friends that went into consulting, and of course at Georgetown, it was always like a consulting or banking pick that people would make, and people would just stick to that lane, but no one really crossed over and did both. And for me, there was just something irresistible about consulting, because I wanted to be able to work with businesses as an advisor still, but on different types of problems, because consulting firms work on a very wide array of projects compared to banking. And I could go on about the comparison between both. The scope of work in banking is much more narrow. It's very specialized, and you become very good at, working with businesses at very pivotal stages of their life cycle. where they're raising or they're buying or selling. But in consulting, you work with businesses across the entire stage of their life cycle as well, but on very different projects. Like one day you could be working on a pricing project where you're trying to help Walmart figure out whether how they should price their SKUs. Another day or in another month, you could be working to support a private equity firm that's going to buy a business, and you're doing the market due diligence for them. So you're trying to figure out, like, is the market that they're buying this business is it actually attractive? Are there headwinds or tailwinds? What are some potential growth levers that they have? Is the customer base like sticky or is it not? And a lot of those numbers from the report might end up actually getting plugged into some financial model that a private equity associate is building. So that's like the other end of the spectrum. Another day you could be working on like a post-merger integration. There's just an endless number of project types. And I think that's also why a lot of people don't know what consultants do, and they struggle to distill it down into a simple one or two liner that people can understand. And it's because they work on a lot of different things. And technically you could consult on anything. But if you think about like BCG, the firm that I ended up moving over to, which is primarily strategy consulting, these are firms that work with large businesses, usually publicly traded, Fortune 500, and they work with the C-suite on pretty important problems. Anything that could keep the CEO up at night could potentially be a consulting engagement. And so, long story short, there was an opportunity to interview with the Boston Consulting Group, and I was also in a process with a private equity firm. So you know how the story panned out, but essentially I just put my nose to the grindstone and was prepping case interviews in the office, like hiding out in like a conference room after the MDs had all gone home, and then somehow managed to swing the BCG offer and decided to take that over the middle market private equity shop in New York, because it felt like in that moment, to me, it felt like the option that was going to be the most interesting and lead to more potentially unexpected outcomes, which was exciting.
You're living life for the plot. That's fun. And I think there's something to that. Well, so I guess, do you regret doing the analyst career first?
I get asked this question a lot, Max, and I don't, because every experience that has led to where I am today contributed in a different way. And so actually coming into consulting with an analyst background in banking helped me immensely, because I had already developed a lot of the technical skills around how to be good at Excel and PowerPoint. And I had already been cultivating that very strong work ethic and that client advisory focused mindset. And so it actually was a very seamless transition where I was able to focus a lot more on just learning the new subject matter of whatever the consulting project was about, or really just like emulating and picking up on the ways that my consulting managers and partners were able to manage stakeholders and clients. And again, this is where I think the development of the soft skills really happened, because I had already developed a lot of the hard skills.
Okay, makes sense. And so, but you started over again when you went back to consulting, right? Like you immediately began at the junior level. And so that it's got to hurt a little bit from like an ego perspective to be like, okay, like I'm a couple years into my career and here I am back at like square one, chasing around brand muffins again. Was that at all a problem for you?
I definitely did think about it, and it did factor into my decision. And to this day, I think, as I think about it rationally, for someone if someone is purely optimizing from the financial standpoint, they would have just stayed in banking and probably taken that private equity role. I used to think that I was the type of person that purely optimized for financial gain. But as I look back on my career so far, and granted, I'm still fairly young and have only a few data points, I've realized something about myself, which is that while the financial aspect is important, it doesn't seem to be the only factor that I take into consideration when I make these big career moves. Oftentimes, the learning and the almost novelty of a new experience factors in pretty heavily. So, maybe this will come to bite me back in the future, but I'm making a long-term bet that having these diverse experiences and being able to learn from all these people that are at the top of their field doing different things is going to benefit me more. What I've realized about myself is that I don't always make career decisions with the short-term financial gain as the number one deciding factor. I actually optimize more for learning, and if it's a new experience that I think is going to somehow positively contribute to my skill set. And so it's a little bit of a long-term bet, because this could bite me in the butt later on if I end up, not being able to grow my business to a certain size, or if I end up not being able to specialize in a certain area. It very well could be the wrong way to approach one's career. But for me personally, that is the approach that I believe works the best so far. And I'm also someone that loves to learn and always believes that anything can be learned. So placing myself in the room with really smart people, whether they work in finance or consulting or in big tech, that's been the strategy that
I think that's totally rational. Like, I'm not going to fault you. I think the default assumption, especially in like these high finance careers and coming out of intense competitive undergrad programs, is that like you are maximizing for dollars, that like the NPV of your career is the only thing that matters. But I've also found that a couple points in my career, I've made a decision that prioritized learning and prioritized interest and like sheer like personality fit more so than the basic economics of it. And I think that that's rational, because realistically, like I'm sure you've seen all the studies about like how income correlates with well-being and like positive affect and happiness and things like that. And there's diminishing marginal returns, where after a certain point it starts to like taper out. And I think that, Daniel Kahneman did a famous study about this. There's been some dispute about like what exactly that number looks like and how it changes and whatnot. But being able to prioritize other things in your life in addition to the compensation makes a ton of sense. Now, going to consulting, still not sure it makes sense to me, but we can agree to disagree on that one. And so the last question I'll ask you about your time at BCG is related to like the work and like how it varies relative to investment banking. Because on your LinkedIn, you joked that building beautiful PowerPoint slides is all you did at BCG. So how much of consulting was actually just building PowerPoints versus thinking, like actual thinking?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. And I think building beautiful PowerPoint slides is a valuable skill, for sure, without a doubt. Like it or not, I think that a lot of executives do get wooed by a very clean looking slide deck. But the important thing is what's actually on those slides, right? And in consulting, because the final deliverable in many cases is a 50-page slide deck that you're going to send to the executives, the thinking that is on those slides becomes incredibly important, because that, at the end of the day, is what they're paying for. They're not paying for just any slide deck that looks nice. They're paying for a slide deck that obviously is formatted really well, but has ideas that hopefully are going to move the needle on their business or turn things around. So as a junior consultant, though, it's really important to note that the thinking is split between the entire team. So it's not just you doing all the thinking. It's, your manager and the partner is also thinking about things. But what you have to remember is that the partner and the senior members of the consulting team are very much high level. They have the relationship with the client, and they probably understand the industry that the client operates in extremely well, because they work on a lot of projects with those types of companies, or maybe they even worked in that industry before they moved into consulting. So then where's the value add from the junior consultant is the natural next question. This is where in consulting, I really realized being the closest to the data and being the closest to the analysis, and sometimes actually having less experience becomes an asset. because you are the person that's not so stuck in the weeds or so familiar with the traditional ways of doing things that actually you can come in and say, wait, this doesn't actually make sense, or I'm not seeing this in the data. And it takes a little bit of courage and a little bit of self-belief, again, to come out to your team and say, hey guys, I know so-and-so is saying that this should be true, but really after talking to 10 different people in the field and pouring through some of this data, I'm not seeing that. So that is where, if I were to think about the split between just PowerPoint creation versus the thinking, it's probably 50-50 when it comes to the junior level consultant's role, because we're not just making any random slides here. We can make slides really quickly with the shortcuts and everything. We can make them look really good. But at the end of the day, the clients are paying millions of dollars for the thinking that is on those slides.
Yeah. And sometimes I'll argue whether or not they get their money's worth based on my experience looking at consultant slides. But again, I've been ripping on consultants way too hard here because I'm an investment banking coach. I recognize I'm biased, and you did both. And not only did you do both, but like, I got to hear about the next chapter too here. So we've talked about your time at BCG. We talked about the things that you've learned and like why it was good or not good to like do an analyst program first. But you kind of read like someone who's just checking off the bucket list of like the most prestigious career paths, because you did the banking, you did the consulting, and then of course you had to go check off high tech and at none other than Google. And so how was it breaking into technology with a background from consulting and banking?
It was a very interesting process of breaking in, and then also the experience itself was very interesting relative to those two fields, which I'm happy to get into. I can talk a little bit on the process of breaking in first, and then transition over into some of the key differences and what the experience was like. What a lot of people don't see from my LinkedIn profile is, even though I was coming from a very blue chip background of investment banking and consulting, I actually applied to Google 5 times before I got that role. Was rejected. First time, second time, third time, fourth time. And same exact profile, same resume, just such a sheer volume of people applying to these roles, especially at a big tech company like Google, that the lesson I think for people listening is that even someone that you may think has a very strong profile gets rejected a lot for reasons that may not have anything to do with the strength of your profile. So if you get rejected from an investment banking internship, it has nothing, like, yes, there are maybe things you could improve in your application the next time, but there are also going to be many instances in your career, not just at the beginning, where you'll get rejected from something and you'll not really know why. And not letting it get to you, or to think of it as a detriment of your own doing is really important, because I had to apply 5 times and then got the interview. And then once I was in the interview process, it was a very consulting-esque interview process, because the entire team that I worked with was comprised of ex-McKinsey, ex-BCG consultants. So I think they were looking for a certain type of profile, and there's a big case study, take-home case study component, and just like thinking through and presenting on a ambiguous business problem. And of course, you've got your behavioral interviews as well. But at that point, I think I had become quite comfortable with interviewing. I had gotten a lot of reps in. So I don't want to downplay the amount of work that went into the interview process itself, because it was definitely still challenging. But I think relative to the rigor and the just the amount of prep that I had put into my banking roles, and even for the BCG role, this was it was a lot less, just due to the fact that I only needed to prepare for maybe a month or a few weeks leading up to the interview.
Yeah, well, and I have to imagine that with that sort of like sheer determination to apply 5 separate times, that you probably just got better each time you went through like the interview process. Like I remember that I was very, very lucky where I had done dozens of interviews prior to landing my job at Lazard. I had a variety of like internships and variety of like, in semester type things and some other banks as well. And that just made me so much more confident each time I did the interview where I said, tell me about yourself. Why are you interested in investment banking? Why are you interested in this firm specifically? You just started to like get some rust off of it. And the answers got a little bit more polished each time so that by the time you're in the fifth go around, I'm sure you're just like a much better interviewer, much better candidate in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up, Max, because something I didn't really talk about when we were discussing my banking recruiting journey is the rejections. And I had peers that the first bank they interviewed at, they got the offer. And every time I would hear that story, I'd think to myself, wow, like why can't that be me? Because in my case, every time I applied for an investment bank, it was like I never got the first one that I interviewed at because I didn't have the reps in. And there were instances where, for example, I remember very early on getting this interview with Barclays, bulge bracket investment bank, and really, really, really wanting it. I had actually networked with a bunch of people, and I was ready to land the offer. I was like, this is my moment. But because it was one of the earliest interviews that I did, I was a lot more nervous, a lot more anxious in the interview, didn't have my responses as polished as they probably could have been, and ultimately didn't get the offer. And in that moment, I was really crushed. But looking back, I needed those reps to eventually land the role that I did end up working in.
Yeah. And I think that practice makes perfect as with anything. And so one of my favorite things to see as a coach at Wall Street Mastermind is that progression where people, they do a mock interview and it like kind of sucks to start, but then they do another one, it gets a little bit better. And they do another 3, and it's starting to look pretty good. And then they do another 20, another 30, another 50, and it starts to actually like look really, really incredible. And so that's one of my primary pieces of advice to everyone who comes into the program is like, first off, like meet with our coaches, but also meet with each other. Like we create a community where we get people posting like 5 times a day, like who wants to mock right now? Who wants to mock right now? Who wants to mock right now? And getting out there, actually getting those reps in is just going to be so much more useful than continuing to read some guide about like how to get into Google or like going on some forum and saying, here's the 10 brain teasers Google likes to ask most, all that good stuff. And so I've got to hear though, because banking and consulting are notoriously intense environments, and big tech doesn't have that reputation a lot of the time. There's pockets of tech that are like sort of the 996 intensity, sort of like 24/7 startup life, but a lot of it is known for having like a much more egalitarian culture. And like when I was working at a startup, it was like, there were ping pong tables in the office and stuff. And so how was it working in a corporate environment after going from the elite consulting and finance worlds?
It was so different than consulting and banking. I don't even know where to start. Yes, the hours are way less. One thing I did observe though was as you do move up the ranks, the executives at a company like Google are still working around the clock. They're either traveling all the time because it's a really big business. They're constantly thinking about work, even if they're not on calls on the weekends. And I think that's a natural part of just what it takes to be an executive at such a large business. But for, I would say, the majority of the staff and employees, it is a much more relaxed environment relative to banking or consulting. And so I actually really appreciated that because it gave me room to really double down on content creation, which was something I was doing on the side that I had started in consulting. But now that I was at Google, I was able to spend more of my spare time thinking about that and putting out high quality content. And that really, really benefited the channel because it grew the most while I was at Google. So work-wise, I would say the work was still pretty interesting because we were essentially doing in-house corporate strategy for the business. And so I was no longer jumping around different projects in different industries. So there was less breadth, but the depth of work was a lot greater because now I was meeting with all the people on the different teams and really understanding the business at a very deep level. And it also opened my eyes to the difference between strategy, which always sounds really good in theory, and then actually having to execute on that strategy, which is oftentimes much more difficult than people realize. So even at a business like Google that's considered to be a very progressive, tech company that is making a huge splash in this space. I mean, they've got almost 200,000 employees, and there's any initiative that you want to roll out, it takes a monumental effort to actually see it through. So I learned a lot from that experience, especially around executive stakeholder management. I was basically there were very few guardrails relative to consulting or banking where you have an associate that's essentially checking your work every time it goes out. Here, I was the associate, and the team would often just be me, and then my manager, who would effectively be like a VP or director at an investment bank, and then the senior stakeholder that we were working with, which would be like a vice president of marketing or something like that.
Yeah, it's a very different structure and hierarchy, and I actually appreciate that parallel, breaking it down. Like, what do the titles mean? Because one of the things that like always confused my family, because I have family members who work in tech. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I'm interviewing for like VP jobs and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, wait a second, like you're a VP? Like I thought you had to be like 50 to be a VP at like a tech company or something like that. And so, there's like some different titling and some different role responsibilities too, where like a lot of these institutions, sometimes there's less oversight. And in like banking, it's like you've got to go get everything reviewed by your associate. Then your associate gets it reviewed by the VP, gets it reviewed by the principal, gets it reviewed by the director, or whatever the case may be, all the way on up to the top. And in tech, like a lot of times you're just moving so fast that that's just not the case. And like you also mentioned though, that during this time, like it gave you some of the space to start your next thing, which was creating content. And so talk me through what that process was like of becoming a creator during Google. And like at the very beginning of this conversation where we're talking about your time in at Georgetown and in finance recruiting, you were like, no, I'm never going to post content. Like it's not something I'm interested in. It's kind of restricted for people that are recruiting for finance. And so what switched, and how was that process of becoming a creator at Google?
Yeah, so I do want to take a step back and say that I started posting probably a year before I joined Google. But at Google was when the channel saw the most growth. So the reason why I started posting in the first place is, again, that creative side of me that when I was in university, I was able to scratch that itch through music. But when I started working full time, I pretty much completely stopped. I didn't have time for it, right? You're working in banking and consulting, and the career really took priority. So I pretty much went completely to zero. And for a while, I didn't really notice any sort of like desire to go to do something creative. But over time, it started to build up. And the main thing for me was I felt like on the weekends when I did have a little bit of spare free time, I wanted to do something that was productive, but in a fulfilling sort of way. Like I didn't just want to do work for the sake of work, but I wanted to do something that was actually interesting. And I tried a few different things. I tried writing a blog. I tried even posting a couple stock pitches on Seeking Alpha, and none of it really stuck, long story short. And YouTube was really interesting to me, but I was scared to actually have my face out on the internet like that. And when you're on video, it's very hard to hide what you're like. When you go on platforms like X or LinkedIn, which are primarily written mediums, it's a lot easier to pretend to be something that you're not. But when you're on video, people see you as you are. They hear your vocal inflection, they see your facial expressions. And I think that's a big reason why a lot of people don't like going on video. But the reason why YouTube was so intriguing to me was because, one, I absolutely love YouTube as a user, and I've watched so much content on YouTube, and I'm sure you have as well, Max. And two, I just remember watching a YouTube video about content creation because I was trying to learn a little bit about it, and it was like YouTube advice. The person was saying, hey, I challenge you, post your first video in the next 24 hours, because if you don't, you never will. And something about that really struck me. And I thought to myself, you know what? Maybe I do just need to try something and see what happens. Because if I don't do anything, then obviously nothing is going to happen. And again, you're seeing that side of me that is like the same version of Matt that was thinking, oh, let's go try consulting instead of the PE role. It was also me being a little bit risky, taking a little bit more of a risk, being okay with that risk, and almost feeling a little bit excited by it. So long story short, propped my iPhone on top of my desk, and I just talked at the camera. It was super awkward. And then I used a free editing software that night that I downloaded, had no idea how to use it, just slapped on some background music that was way too loud. And then I uploaded it and posted it, and I got like 5 views, and I think like one of them was me rewatching it, and then 4 was like my family that I sent in the family group.
That's nice of them to watch it. Imagine if you'd only gotten 2 views, you'd be like, which of you like actually was the real homie there? That's super funny.
But to fast forward and close this question out, that was the original start. And from that point on, I just committed to dedicating my weekends to content creation. So every week I would upload on Sundays, and told myself that I would just do this for the next 6 to 12 months. And if it didn't take off after that point, or genuinely if I did not enjoy it anymore at that point, then I would just stop and have no regrets. And that's a principle that I continue to live by today. And even with running Forge, my marketing agency, I also have that same mentality of let's try it out for 6 to 12 months. And if by the end of that, 1, we aren't seeing a lot of traction, and 2, I'm not enjoying it as much as I thought I would, then we can always revisit and reflect and think about next steps from there. But fortunately, the content creation did work out. And when I went over to Google, I had just so much more time to not just create the videos, but mentally think about it. I had a lot more headspace to think about content, and that enabled me to create better quality content and really create content about topics that my audience cared about, which contributed to
Gotcha. Okay. So I want to ask, 1 or 2 more questions, and you can hear about your experience with Forge before we close out here. But people often underestimate, I would say, how hard organic is, because a lot of the times there's a selection effect where realistically, I'm not going to be going interviewing someone who had like a failed YouTube channel after like posting 2 videos and got five views. I'm only interviewing people who have been extraordinarily successful in whatever they did. In your case, you were successful in banking, tech, and then also in content creation. And so I think that like a lot of people walk away with the idea of just like, oh, if I just like keep posting every day for 6 months, like it's going to work out. And so what are some of like the biggest mistakes you made early, and like why is organic content creation so hard?
This is an excellent question, Max. I'll talk about the mistakes first, and then why it's so hard after. And those two are kind of related. I think a big mistake that people make with content creation is a lot of people have an idea of who they want to be online. They have this idea that, oh, if I project or portray myself as this kind of thought leader, or I want to be known as this guy who does this thing. The problem with that mindset is we are very bad judges of what other people actually want to see.
Interesting.
And to this day, and I've spoken with a lot of content creators that have gone viral and gotten millions and millions of views. A lot of them have told me, that viral video that got 20 million views, I had no idea that one was going to go viral. I filmed it in 20 minutes and then I uploaded it very haphazardly on a Friday night.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it blew up. And I can say the same with my channel. There are many videos where I actually didn't think it was the best video I made. Or I thought to myself, I don't really think that people are going to like this. And then it does really well. And so the point I'm trying to get across is that while there are fundamental content creation principles that I think everyone should adhere to, there's always also an element of chance. And I think recognizing that sometimes you just need to be open to trying things that might not feel right or might not feel the best in the moment, because you need to give yourself the opportunity to increase the surface area of possibilities that you're going to post that one piece of content that actually resonates really strongly with the audience. So I think mistake number one is people just, before they've even started, they pigeonhole themselves into the one specific type of persona, and then they don't allow themselves to explore and find that format or that idea or that topic that their audience actually really, really wants. Another mistake, I think, is obviously the consistency thing. A lot of people just struggle to stay consistent. And like it or not, content is a numbers game. So you've got to put in the number of reps. I've, to this day, posted over 100 videos, long form videos, to be clear. So these are videos that are usually at least 10 minutes long. And so that is, hundreds. If for example, I take between 5 to 10 hours to produce each video and I've uploaded over 100, then you can see that's just an astronomical number of hours where I've spent just thinking and working on content. And I also think that it's one of those things that's just everyone knows it, but it's very hard to actually do in practice. Yeah. And I guess the third mistake that I'll close out with is I think a lot of people also struggle to improve and to adapt their content. You said earlier, Max, a lot of people will upload for 6 months, but that doesn't mean that they're going to blow up. And that's absolutely right. You cannot keep banging your head against the wall and doing the same exact thing if it's not working. And there's a little bit of a humility aspect to this, because you have to be humble enough to recognize, okay, if we've been doing this for 6 months and we're not seeing the results that we want, why is that the case? Like, maybe there is actually a flaw in the way that I'm thinking. Like, maybe I am actually approaching this from the wrong perspective and our strategy needs to be rethought. And yeah, that is something that I think a lot of people also struggle with.
That's the adaptability, because if you are consistent, like you're forming patterns, you're forming habits, that's probably what's easy. It takes less thought to do the same thing that you were doing before. And it's hard to separate the signal from the noise, because like here you are saying like be consistent, and then you're also saying, but you also have to be adaptable. And so it's a confusing world where you have to do both a little bit. And so obviously you've been able to navigate that effectively, but hard.
Yeah, I think that organic content specifically, is really hard because it's uncomfortable. It's not natural to create the type of content I think that people, especially if you're trying to go viral, and I know that's not everyone's objective, but you often have to be comfortable with putting yourself out there for judgment from others. And that's not a natural thing that many of us or any of us really want to do. To put a video out there, put a post out there and see what people think. And it's always easier for people to place their judgments when they are observers and not the ones that are actually in the arena. But I think that's part of why it's so hard. And at the end of the day, though, it's actually not as hard as people think. Because to me, creating good organic content is actually a lot less about what camera you have, what gear you use, what software you have, even your content strategy. I think fundamentally the best content creators out there just understand human behavior and psychology, and they just really understand the person that they're speaking to. And they understand that it's not 1,000 people, it's not 10,000 people. You're speaking to one person. This is also a mistake that I'll tack on there, is people try to speak to everyone, and then they end up speaking to no one, because you may feel like you're alienating people if you create a piece of content that is speaking to a very hyper-specific niche audience. But your goal shouldn't be to speak to everyone. So in your case, Max, of course, you're building Wall Street Mastermind, so you're speaking probably to students who are looking to break into investment banks. And so as someone who has been in that exact position before, I can see that the content that you're putting out really speaks to that customer profile, because I understand what it feels like to have been in that position and to feel that way. And I think that's the fundamental, that's the 80-20 of content creation, is understanding the audience and being able to speak to their pain points.
Well, this is incredible advice, and kind of a fun meta conversation to be having during a podcast episode like this. But the last thing that I'll just ask you before we get into our closeout here is, I just want to understand a little bit more about like what winning looks like going forward from here, because you've launched this incredible career. Like, truly, in my introduction, I think I said basically like, you've hit the trifecta. You did tech, you did investment banking, you did private consulting, and now you've gone off and you've done something very, very entrepreneurial. And so I'd be curious to hear, first off, like, what tipped you over the edge to the point where you're able to say, no, I'm going to go like take a leap here and do something that's not going to provide me a very steady, very nice paycheck. And then last question, what does winning look like for Forge Media, your new business, over the next year, over the next 5 years? Like, what is the ultimate goal here?
Yeah, I'll talk about the mindset around leaving the stable job first, and I'll talk about what winning looks like for Forge in 2026. So on the mindset side, I think I've always had a little bit of I said rebellious side earlier, but entrepreneurial itch might be like a better way to describe it. I think that fundamentally entrepreneurs, or anyone who wants to do something that is a little bit off the beaten path, has to have a little bit of a rebellious side to them, or just enough of, you have to kind of believe that, oh, I can do this, because you're the only one that will believe in the thing that you're building. That's not to say you won't have supporters. I think supporters is like a cherry on top. But at the end of the day, no one owes any kind of conviction in your idea except you in the very beginning. Like with the YouTube channel, with content, in the early days, I didn't expect anyone to really support what I was doing. The only one who really believed in it was myself. And why should other people, in the absence of visible traction? So for me, I've had this entrepreneurial itch, and I've realized over time, for a while, I was actually very conflicted, because I wanted to start a business, but I didn't know what to do. But as I reflected on what have I gained over the last few years in my professional career, and also what have I gained in the personal side of my side hobbies, because that's an indication of things that I'm really passionate about outside of work, I realized that there was this opportunity to combine my love for content creation and all those hundreds of hours that I'd been putting into learning how to speak to an audience, and a lot of the meta skills that we've been talking around content creation, combining that with the client advisory, stakeholder management, just business operations and strategy knowledge from the consulting and corporate strategy days, and then like the executional rigor from investment banking, and combine that all into a service that essentially helps businesses to use content more effectively. So it's like the marriage of the personal side and the professional side. And specifically, we decided to focus on LinkedIn because when I was working with a lot of marketers at Google, I realized very quickly that LinkedIn was a massive opportunity for a lot of businesses. And it's a very underutilized channel, but for the ones that do use it effectively, they see outsized returns. So yeah, that's kind of the genesis of Forge, my LinkedIn-focused marketing agency.
Well, so last bit then, what's the vision? What does this look like? What is success in 5 years?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that my definition of success today is very different from the definition of success that I had 5 years ago. 5 years ago, if you'd asked me this question, I probably would have said that success would look like running a multi-million-dollar business and raising $100 million in capital from VCs and trying to, scale this thing to the next unicorn. But over time, I realized those success metrics are not the ones that I actually want to guide and live my life by, more broadly speaking. I think those are success metrics that a lot of other people have. But for me personally, it again goes back to the whole thing about learning and enjoyment. Because I think in the long run, the thing that I'm going to be able to stick to the most is going to be the thing that I legitimately enjoy and am so obsessed and interested by that the money just comes as a byproduct of that. That's what I observed from the YouTube channel, because the money was never the intention with the YouTube channel. And to this day, I have not monetized that heavily on that audience. Money is a nice byproduct of the value that's being created on the channel. And I want to take that same approach into running Forge. So my success metric is not going to be, are we hitting a certain revenue target by year 5? It's going to be, are we legitimately solving and helping, solving problems and helping clients to see success in their businesses? Am I learning more every day about what it takes to run a successful service business? And more importantly, am I still enjoying it 5 years down the line? And I think if all those criteria are met, then I will consider this to be a success.
Fascinating. I love that mindset. I think that's a very healthy, very different mindset to see in investment banking. So thank you for bringing that to the episode today. And before we get into our closers, I just want to reflect on some of the things like we've talked about. Like we've covered a lot of ground here. Like we talked about way back at the beginning, like the mindset that it requires to break into investment banking in the first place, and the urgency, the complacency, the target versus the non-target. Then we talked about like how that translated into the actual job, and how the glitz and glamour of investment banking sometimes looks a little bit different than what actually goes on under the scenes. And then we talked about that crazy shift that you did from banking to consulting, which I've rarely seen before, and how that sort of balanced things out before switching over to tech, becoming a content creator, grinding things out, posting your first video that one night on your iPhone, getting 5 views. And here you are today. And so, Matt, this has been an excellent conversation. I just want to finish with 3 quick rapid fire questions that I ask everyone who comes on. So first off, since you began your career in Wall Street, what is the highest ROI habit or technique that you picked up on Wall Street that you still use today?
I think the highest ROI technique that I've picked up is picking a very small set of tasks that you consider to be non-negotiables for the day. And I continue to live by this because now that I am a founder and I'm running my own business, there's a million different priorities and a million different requests that always come through every day. And being able to prioritize and realize that if I can just get these maybe 3 to 5 things done today, then today's a success. That has been a huge unlock for me, because when you are in banking and it feels like your to-do list is endless, that's not to say don't do everything that your managing director tells you to, but there's a lesson in just prioritization and communicating with your team. So, having the non-negotiable 3 to 5 things every day. That's been the highest ROI, I think, for me.
I replicate that in my day-to-day as well. So second rapid fire question here. If we were to look at your calendar or bank or credit card statement, Matt, what would it say that you actually value?
Ooh. Right now, it's probably, this is a bit of a boring answer, but it's like a lot of random software subscriptions, because I just am, one, I'm horrible at keeping track of everything, but I'm also constantly trying like different tools out, different content creation, or just like AI tools, always trying to learn and see what people are coming up with. So my credit card statement is just a list of recurring expenses every month.
xyzcompany.ai.com subscription. Yeah, that's funny. Okay, and last but not least here, Matt, just to wrap us out, copying a question from How I Built This, how much of your success do you think is due to your hard work and skill, and how much is due to luck?
Hard work definitely plays a role in it, but luck and just being in the right place at the right time. Over time, I've just realized that plays a disproportionate amount on people's careers. So it's something that I didn't really realize when I was a student, but now that I'm a few years in, I've realized that it's important to just do everything that we can to, be ready when the opportunities do present themselves, because we don't know when exactly they're going to show up.
Well, with that, Matt, you've built some incredible opportunities for yourself. I learned a ton. I hope that everyone else did too. And this was an incredible opportunity to pick your brain. So thank you for taking the time, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Max. Great to be on.